All right, guys, this is it. Every once in a while I get an epiphany, and this is one of those videos you are not going to want to miss. Stick with me right to the bitter end. I hope you won't be disappointed. I'm going to give you my best guesstimates about what's about to happen. The World Health Organization is now urging countries to start stockpiling medications for nuclear emergencies after the EU's latest warning on Putin, they say. We're going to talk about this and many other stories in just a minute. But before I do that, guys, I need you to understand that there are intelligence communities in this world who know exactly what is about to happen. I'm not talking about shadowy figures sitting around a boardroom table planning on how they're going to manipulate people and control the world. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about intelligence communities who know exactly, maybe more or less, ballpark at least, what is about to happen. And sometimes you get too close to a problem, you got to step back from the forest to see the trees, to see exactly what is about to happen. And I'm going to share my best guesstimates with you today, okay? Now, the reason why I know this is because I've had experiences in this preparedness industry where companies or people have reached out to me with information that confirms this, like 100% undeniable, indisputable proof that only I know, because I cannot disclose these people's names, because if I do, of course, they run the risk of being identified and having their positions compromised. Why do they do this? Because they're good, honest people, and no, these aren't people in these really high prestigious positions. One example is the MRE fiasco of early 2022. If you don't remember that, that was when I got a call from the Red Cross asking me if I could ship all of the MREs. They needed them like fast. This is right before the war started. They said, we need all the MREs you can get to us as quickly as possible by a specific date. Okay, and that's when I knew something was about to pop off. Now the question is, how did they know about that? Who told them that this was about to happen, that they were so absolutely 100% certain? And moreover, I actually had a phone call from somebody who worked with that entity, and they told me that, yes, this is 100%, something big is going on. And again, I cannot disclose any information about that individual, but I will say that there's people who know what's about to happen before the mainstream media does, before any of us YouTube political pundits and spectators do, speculators, I should say, do. And knowing that, if we know that the knowledge, the information is out there to make these inferences, then we do have freedom to speculate a little bit. And that's all I'm doing in this video. Now, if we step back and see the forest for the trees, what do we see with this conflict and the sending of all these tanks? One thing that should strike people as obvious is that you have every single country within NATO suddenly in unison pledging tanks. I'm talking about France. I'm talking about Sweden thinking about sending 130 tanks. Italy sending tanks. The Baltic states sending everything they got. Poland obviously sending tanks. The UK, Germany sending tanks, and every country that Germany has sold their tanks to. So put your thinking cap on just for a second and ask yourself, how is it possible that the Ukrainian military, in its diminished state, is going to be able to train all of these guys on all of these different systems in the time required to push back this major Russian offensive that is supposed to be coming in spring? Ask yourself, how is that even remotely possible? Because it's not. You need logistics infrastructure for each one of these systems. You need training. You need somebody to maintain all of these systems. You need to get them into the country. How are they going to do it? Well, let's just say it. Okay, what they're going to do is they're obviously going to have to put a guy in that equipment because the Ukrainians are not going to be able to run it themselves. Now, if you're the Russians and you're seeing all of the equipment from NATO flooding in at once, what do you think is about to happen? Russia is now in a de facto state of war with Europe, like we've been saying for many, many months now. But now it is incredibly obvious. And this is why you have things like this happening that nobody is talking about. Russia, Estonia expelling ambassadors amid destroyed relations. This is not even news. Nobody's even talking about this. Nobody's talking about how Latvia is closing its doors to Russians traveling to the country. January 25th, 2023. No more ambassadors, no more travel. You only do that if a war is about to start. Why is it that Moscow is installing air defense? I mean, sometimes we just have to step back because it's very easy to be overly optimistic and say, well, it's just, give everything a different name and a label. It's not really NATO fighting the Russians, but really it is. And why is Moscow installing air defense? Look at the proximity. They're a lot more proximate to these Baltic state countries who are members of NATO, where there are American military. I think that if the Americans are going to engage the Russians, it's probably going to start in here. That's my gut feeling of what's going on here right now. Some people are saying that it's the Russians trying to create a diversion here, and recall, other people say it's the other way around. Because it depends on who you're listening to. Some people are saying the Russians are winning the war. The Russians have broken through the line, and they're just basically sitting there in limbo in Bakhmut so that they can grind down the Ukrainian military. But overall, they've broken through. So now they could just blitzkrieg in there if they want. So some Russia bros say. Some people claim the opposite. Some people claim that there's infighting within the Russian military, that the Chechens are fighting with the Wagner and that the Wagner are fighting with the Russian military federation, right? So who do you trust? Who do you believe? Well, it's starting to look like this war is really becoming a war with like NATO versus Russia. And you really almost have to step back because we've heard this all before, right? All these countries are sending military support, but never have you seen this mass, unanimous commitment of heavy armor all at once to a country who is broken, defeated. The politicians are being cleansed out of the Zelensky government. They're getting rid of a lot of people. They're doing a complete changeover of everything. Does it not look as though Ukraine is becoming synonymous with NATO at this point? And this is the really, really scary part. This is why the WHO is saying, hey, it's Johnny come lately, right? The WHO, the guy who comes in at 3 a.m. to the party when everybody's already plastered or going home and says, hey, why is everybody going home? Because we already know the countries of the world who are capable of preparing have already been preparing. The U.S. has been buying acute radiation sickness medication for the past few months. In fact, they bought $290 million of it just a while ago. And of course, Thyrosafe and potassium iodide pills have been flying off the shelf all over Europe and the United States. Who are they preparing for? I'm quite certain they're not preparing for us because we don't even have bunkers, but they're definitely preparing for some VIP people. Maybe your number will be pulled. Maybe you work in a position that's prestigious enough. But something to keep in mind is that the World Health Organization is saying that this is the reason, this is the excuse they're giving, okay? Understand this. This is what the World Health Organization is saying. They're saying potential scenarios that you should prepare for are things at nuclear power plants, medical or research facilities, or accidents during the transportation of radioactive materials, as well as the intentional uses of radioactive materials with malicious intent. End. Period. As well as intentional uses of radioactive materials with malicious intent. That's a pretty clever way of saying nuclear bomb. You see, they don't want to spook people because on the one hand, you need support for the war, but if people knew the specter of nuclear war was so ripe right now, they would likely not be supporting it as much. But we've been told by our leaders that Russia's not going to cross the red line. In fact, I made sure that I captured an excellent soundbite from this political pundit, I can't remember what her name is, the other day, where she's like, Russia's never going to do anything. We can just keep stepping over red lines. We can send F-35s. We can send long-range missiles. They're never going to do anything. They're all talk. Well, I heard a great analogy the other day, and it went something like this. Somebody is trespassing on your property. You say, you come one step closer, I'm going to shoot you. Obviously, we're in the United States in the castle doctrine or whatever it is. We're not in Canada because you can't do this in Canada, but we're speaking hypothetically. And that person, comes into the yard and starts messing with your dog and, starts stabbing your dog or something. You say, well, if you're going to kill my dog, I'm going to shoot you, right? And they keep transgressing. And then they throw a rock through your window. And then you say, oh, well, if you do that again, then I'm going to shoot you. But you don't shoot them. And then maybe they grab one of your kids at that time. And they try to start kidnapping your kids or doing God knows what, or hurting your kids. And you say, if you keep doing that, I'm going to shoot you, right? So at what point do you think that the Russians are going to break? Because eventually, now that all of NATO is collectively fighting under the guise of Ukraine, and it's going to be mercenaries, whatever. I mean, it's going to be soldiers, likely going to be soldiers. And I mean, can I say that? Am I allowed to say that? I mean, geez, it's got to be obvious at this point in time. Because there's no way you're going to be able to train them that quickly. So what are we to do? Except send troops to man this equipment. The Russians are going to view it as NATO is fighting us in Ukraine. And thus we're at war with Ukraine. And so eventually Russia is going to be forced to stop that transgressor, to shoot them. The question is, where are they going to stop the transgressor? And I don't know where it's going to be, but we are fast approaching that point in time where Russia is about to not just fire a warning shot. I think we're already past the warning shot. If we do hear a warning shot, maybe it's going to be a nuclear detonation somewhere. It very well may be. I'm not talking about nuking Berlin or anything that dramatic. I'm talking about just doing a nuclear test, a simple run-of-the-mill nuclear test. A violation of the New START Treaty would be enough to create global panic. And might be enough to put NATO on notice that, hey, you really have crossed a red line this time. Okay? Now, if Russia is about to lose this war and they are not willing to push back so readily, then you need to start preparing for the worst. I'm talking about the absolute worst, and I know that sounds redundant on this channel, but I'm deadly serious. We need to really, really start preparing for the absolute worst case scenario. If Russia, on the other hand, is about to win, and this tank thing is just one last ditch attempt by NATO to say that they did everything they could, meanwhile it's just going to be a bunch of equipment thrown into the meat grinder, and they don't plan on Ukraine being victorious at all, then we don't have to worry about nuclear war right now, but we will again soon, because next in the crosshairs are going to be the Baltic states. Why on earth are all of these ambassadors being expelled? They're not doing this for no reason. And the scary thing about this is right now, is what I'm realizing in Western media, is that this is what they're saying. This is on WE.O News. This is an Indian news agency who's coming up, but they're very, very, pro-Western. They at the beginning of the conflict, they were kind of critical. They were more like a rebellious Al Jazeera, but they've since grown to be very orthodox in the reporting of the conflict. So Ukraine war, EU official says Russia has changed special operation into war with NATO and the West. Now, is it coincidental at all that this is the headline we hear on the exact same day or the day after we all declare that we're going to send all of our tanks? So really, who is declaring war on who? Right. So anyways, they're framing it as Russia is declaring war against NATO. That's the scary part. That's what they want everybody to think. Maybe that's true, but I mean, come on. Now, in terms of, there's a lot of people who have their favorite speculators on YouTube with respect to this issue. For some people, I'm one of those people. I would encourage you to reference a variety of different material. Do not limit yourself in any way. Always try to hear the other side, especially if you are firmly entrenched in your beliefs about an issue. You should always try to hear the other side's perspective. That will make your arguments even stronger if they're correct, right? If you can disprove them. Now, there's guys on the Russia bros side, like Douglas McGregor, the Duran, Scott Ritter. These guys think that Russia has got this case, and they said the same thing for the longest time. But the problem is that they've been wrong countless times. The Duran, for example, never thought, or at least one wing of the Duran, never thought that the war was going to start in the first place. This guy is now referred to as the Oracle of Britain or something like that, okay? Even though he never thought the war was going to happen. I distinctly remember the 2-hour-long interview listening before this war started. He said that Germany was going to come to their senses and they were going to make peace with Russia, and none of this was ever going to happen. This is well over a year ago, okay? Now, Scott Ritter said that Kherson would never fall, that the Russians would never flee Kherson. That would be one of the most embarrassing things that ever happened. And then 2 days later, after it happened, after they withdrew, he said, oh, well, that's exactly what they needed to do all along. And then he said, well, I didn't have all the information. And he admits that he gets things wrong every once in a while. But what I'm saying is you can't follow these guys like they're the gospel. If they're saying that Russia has this thing cased and Ukraine is going to lose, then you can't believe that 100%. And I know they talk the talk. They talk the military talk. So it sounds like they know exactly what they're talking about. And they do when it comes to the different types of equipment and tactics and strategy. But that doesn't mean they are going to be accurate in their predictions, because they haven't been where it counts. They are accurate seemingly when it involves like smaller scale battles, like their analysis of Bakhmut and stuff like that has been fairly accurate. But even what happens beyond Bakhmut, we just don't know. We don't know what's going on. And like I said, there are conflicting parties within the Russian government. So you have the Wagner, who's a private contracting group who's doing a lot of the tough work on the ground in Ukraine. And you have the Chechens, right, who are more of like the religiously charged people. The Wagner is more mercenary motivated. And then you have the Russian Federation, who's like the nationalist wing of it all. And they all have their disputes, their internal disputes. So, I've always suspected that Putin is keeping all of these guys kind of partitioned, and his generals in such a way that his generals fear each other. So, you have Surovikin fearing, what's his face, the leader of the Wagner group, and then you have the Kadyrov, and you have all of these guys kind of triangulated just to kind of keep everybody in check. And you would absolutely have to be paranoid at that level. So nothing is guaranteed in this conflict. Things can spiral wildly out of control. Wildly out of control. Anytime, like any day now, nuclear war could break out. And that's a scary, scary thing. And you can't be alarmist enough when trying to communicate the gravity of the situation to people, because the majority of people have absolutely no idea what's going on. They don't think this is a problem. They're only going to think it's a problem when the World Health Organization comes on and declares that there's a global war happening, just like the pandemic, right? It was going on for months, but it wasn't until they came out and put their official stamp of approval on the whole thing that people took it seriously. So you're in the avant-garde right now. If you're paying attention to this stuff, you truly are still on the forefront of understanding what is transpiring here. We need to step away, see the forest for the trees, and realize that NATO just declared war against Russia. But, of course, it's being framed as Russia declares war against NATO. So what else can I say? Where is this going to go next? Where is that point going to be where Russia engages the Americans? Because that's what it all comes down to. Russia has to push back. Russia has to push back at some point. A red line is going to get crossed one of these days if they don't already have a plan to retaliate for red lines that have already been crossed already. And something big is coming. And, you know, maybe it's this WEF talking about cyber attacks in the next 2 years, how there's a very high likelihood of a catastrophic cyber attack. Maybe that's what it's going to be. And maybe that's going to happen coincidentally just around the time that people are trying to get their money out of the banks and they can't get it out because the shit's hitting the fan. Guys, things are not getting better. I know, I mean, I'd like to think that, okay, maybe the markets are bouncing back, but to me, that's more of it's in the bargaining stage of grief, like I talked about a couple days ago. And I know deep down, I think we all can see what's happening here. And if you can't see what's happening, then I don't want to say it's self-delusion because it's not. You're hopeful. You're hopeful that all this speculation about nuclear war is not real. And I hope that that's the case too. But what if it isn't? What if we really are just in the beginnings of the next great world war? And the Russians are about to finally target some base in NATO, some highway, some bridge, some logistics center, you know, a ship, something like that. And I think we're almost there. I think that's where it starts. That's where the panic is going to start. Let me know what you guys think in the comment section below. Stay safe and stay tuned because we have a well-timed video coming out in the next couple days, which is a World War III specific bug-out bag. So stay tuned for that. And if you haven't seen our video where we interview Stephen Harris earlier today, it was the third installment of that series. Go and check it out, and you'll learn a lot about radiation and how to protect yourself against it. All right, guys, you take care. Stay safe. Canadian Prepper out.